The rotors of the ancient UH-60L Black Hawk beat against the desert air with a rhythm that sounded more like a washing machine than a military aircraft. Captain Sarah Sparrow Thompson ignored the snickers from the flight line as she completed her pre-flight inspection, running her weathered hands along the helicopter's patched exterior. While the other pilots of the 3rd Aviation Battalion prepared their gleaming new UH-60M Black Hawks with their digital displays and automated systems, Sarah lovingly checked every bolt and rivet on her helicopter she'd nicknamed Luna. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Eagle's Nest Airfield at Fort Blackstone, Nevada, where the military's most elite helicopter pilots gathered for the Advanced Combat Aviation Course. These weren't just any aviators. They were the cream of the crop, hand-selected for their exceptional flying records and destined for the most dangerous special operations missions around the world. Yet among this prestigious group, Sarah Thompson stood out for all the wrong reasons. Sarah Thompson had arrived at Fort Blackstone 3 weeks earlier with a service record that should have earned her immediate respect. 22 years of military service, including tours in Afghanistan, Iraq, and countless humanitarian missions across the globe. She'd logged over 4,000 flight hours in conditions that would ground most pilots, from sandstorms in the Middle East to hurricane evacuations along the Gulf Coast. Her personnel file was thick with commendations, including a Distinguished Flying Cross for a medical evacuation under fire that saved 12 wounded soldiers. But none of that seemed to matter at Fort Blackstone, where image and equipment spoke louder than experience. The problem wasn't Sarah's flying ability. It was Luna, her beloved UH-60L Black Hawk, that she'd somehow convinced the brass to let her bring to the course. While the other aircraft in the hangar looked like they'd rolled off the assembly line yesterday, Luna bore the scars of 2 decades of hard service. Her paint was faded and patched, her interior was a patchwork of repairs and modifications, and her avionics suite looked positively ancient compared to the glass cockpits of the newer models. Major Jake Harrison, the course's star student and unofficial leader of the pilot group, never missed an opportunity to point out these differences. Harrison was everything the modern military pilot was supposed to be: young, confident, and completely comfortable with the latest technology. His UH-60M Black Hawk, which he'd christened Dominator, was equipped with every possible upgrade: advanced GPS navigation, thermal imaging systems, automated flight controls, and communication equipment that could coordinate with satellites in orbit. "Check out the museum exhibit in Hangar 7, Harrison announced loudly during the morning briefing, ensuring his voice carried across the assembled pilots. "I think the Smithsonian is missing a helicopter." The comment drew the expected laughter from his circle of admirers, young pilots who hung on his every word and seemed to measure their worth by their proximity to his success. Sarah had heard it all before. During her first week at Fort Blackstone, the jokes had been constant. They called Luna everything from the flying antique to Sparrow's lawnmower, but the nickname that stuck was simply the toy. To the other pilots, with their state-of-the-art equipment and cutting-edge technology, Luna looked like something a child might fly in a video game rather than a serious military aircraft. Lieutenant Marcus Viper Cole, one of Harrison's most devoted followers, took particular pleasure in these verbal jabs. Cole was barely 26 years old, fresh from flight school, and desperate to prove himself worthy of Harrison's approval. "Hey Sparrow," he called out as Sarah walked past the group, "does that thing actually fly, or do you have to push it to get it started?" Quote, Sarah continued walking without acknowledging the comment, her flight helmet tucked under her arm and her worn leather jacket zipped against the Nevada desert's morning chill. She'd learned long ago that responding to such provocations only encouraged more of the same. Instead, she focused on what she could control: her preparation, her flying, and her absolute dedication to understanding every mechanical detail of her aircraft. The Advanced Combat Aviation Course at Fort Blackstone was designed to push pilots to their absolute limits. The curriculum included everything from high-altitude mountain flying to urban warfare scenarios, from night vision operations to combat search and rescue missions in hostile territory. Only the top graduates would be selected for the military's most elite special operations units, where they'd support Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Delta Force operators in missions that officially didn't exist. Colonel Maria Rodriguez, the course commander, was a legend in military aviation circles. She'd been one of the first female combat pilots to see action in the Gulf War and had since become known for her no-nonsense approach to training and her ability to spot exceptional talent regardless of gender, age, or background. When she'd first reviewed Sarah's application for the course, she'd been impressed by the depth of experience and the consistent record of success under challenging conditions. However, even Colonel Rodriguez had raised an eyebrow when she'd seen Sarah's request to bring Luna to the course. The UH-60L was hardly obsolete, but compared to the newer variants, it lacked many of the advanced systems that modern combat operations relied upon. When Rodriguez had questioned Sarah about the decision, the answer had been both simple and complex. "Ma'am, I know this aircraft better than I know myself," Sarah had explained during their initial meeting. "Every vibration, every sound, every response under any condition you can imagine. I've rebuilt her engine twice, modified her controls for better responsiveness, and customized every system to maximize her capabilities. She might not look like much, but Luna and I have been through things together that would ground most modern aircraft." Rodriguez had approved the request, partly out of curiosity and partly because Sarah's record spoke for itself. But she also understood the challenges that Sarah would face. Fort Blackstone's culture, like much of the military's aviation community, had become increasingly focused on technological superiority. Pilots were expected to master complex digital systems, rely on computer-assisted navigation, and trust automated safety features that could take over in emergency situations. This technological emphasis wasn't necessarily wrong. Modern combat operations often required split-second coordination with multiple units, real-time intelligence updates, and the ability to adapt quickly to changing mission parameters. But it had also created a mindset where older equipment was automatically assumed to be inferior, regardless of the operator's skill level or the specific requirements of a mission. Sarah understood this dynamic better than most. She'd spent the first 15 years of her career flying newer aircraft, learning to integrate with digital systems, and adapting to each new technological advancement as it became standard. But her relationship with Luna had taught her something that couldn't be programmed into a computer or displayed on a digital screen: the irreplaceable value of understanding your equipment at the most fundamental level. Luna had come into Sarah's life 7 years earlier, when she'd been assigned to a remote forward operating base in Afghanistan, where maintenance resources were limited, and aircraft had to be kept flying through creative problem-solving rather than replacement parts. The helicopter had already been through 3 previous pilots, each of whom had complained about her age, her quirks, and her need for constant attention. But Sarah had seen something different in the battered aircraft. Beneath the worn exterior and outdated systems was a machine built with redundancy, reliability, and repairability in mind. The older analog systems were less sophisticated than their digital replacements, but they were also less susceptible to electromagnetic interference, easier to troubleshoot when problems arose, and more forgiving of improvised repairs in field conditions. More importantly, Luna's mechanical systems provided immediate tactile feedback that helped Sarah understand exactly what the aircraft was doing at any given moment. She could feel changes in engine performance through the collective, sense shifts in weight distribution through the cyclic, and detect potential problems through subtle changes in vibration or sound that digital systems might filter out or fail to recognize. Over the course of 2 deployments, Sarah and Luna had become inseparable. They'd conducted medical evacuations in sandstorms that grounded other aircraft, performed search and rescue missions in mountain terrain that challenged the limits of helicopter capability, and delivered supplies to remote outposts that couldn't be reached by any other means. By the time Sarah's tour ended, Luna's maintenance record showed the highest operational readiness rate of any aircraft in her unit. Chief Warrant Officer Tom Bradley, Fort Blackstone's senior maintenance supervisor, was one of the few people at the base who understood what Sarah and Luna represented. Bradley had been working on helicopters for over 30 years, and he'd seen the evolution from purely mechanical systems to the computer-controlled marvels that filled the hangar today. He appreciated the capabilities of modern aircraft, but he also remembered when pilots had to truly understand their machines to keep them flying. "That's a solid bird you've got there," Bradley had told Sarah during her first week, after watching her perform a detailed inspection that most pilots would have left to the maintenance crew. "Don't let these young hotshots fool you. Half of them couldn't troubleshoot a fuel leak without a computer telling them where to look." Bradley's comment had been both encouraging and sobering. It confirmed what Sarah already suspected, that her hands-on approach to aircraft maintenance and operation was becoming increasingly rare in a military culture that valued technological sophistication over mechanical understanding. The newer pilots weren't necessarily worse aviators, but they'd been trained in an environment where complex problems were solved by replacing components rather than understanding why those components had failed in the first place. This philosophical divide became apparent during the course's first major exercise, a simulated combat mission that required teams of 2 helicopters to coordinate an assault on a mock enemy compound. Sarah had been paired with Captain David Reaper Walsh, a competent pilot who flew one of the newer UH-60M models but seemed uncomfortable with any situation that required improvisation or adaptation. The mission briefing had been straightforward. Approach the target at low altitude to avoid radar detection, deliver a team of special operations soldiers to secure the compound, and provide close air support during the assault. Weather conditions were forecast to be challenging, with high winds and limited visibility due to blowing sand, but well within the operational parameters of both aircraft. Sarah had spent the previous evening studying weather patterns, reviewing topographical maps, and calculating fuel consumption under various scenarios. She'd also performed an exhaustive pre-flight inspection of Luna, checking everything from rotor blade tracking to hydraulic fluid levels. Her preparation was thorough to the point of obsession, a habit developed through years of flying in conditions where mechanical failure could mean death for everyone aboard. Walsh, by contrast, had relied primarily on his aircraft's sophisticated weather radar and GPS navigation system to plan the mission. His approach wasn't wrong. The technology was designed to handle exactly these types of. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Calculations, but it represented a fundamentally different philosophy of aircraft operation. Where Sarah sought to understand and anticipate every variable that might affect the mission, Walsh trusted his equipment to handle the variables automatically. The difference became apparent as soon as they launched. The weather conditions were indeed challenging, with gusting crosswinds that required constant control inputs to maintain stable flight. Luna's older flight controls demanded more physical effort from Sarah, but they also provided immediate feedback about wind conditions and aircraft performance that helped her anticipate and counter each gust before it could destabilize the helicopter. Walsh's aircraft, with its automated stability systems and fly-by-wire controls, was theoretically better equipped to handle the turbulent conditions. The computer-controlled systems could make hundreds of adjustments per second, far faster than any human pilot could react. But the automation also filtered out much of the sensory information that Sarah was using to fly proactively, rather than reactively. As they approached the target area, the wind conditions worsened beyond the forecast predictions. Dust and sand reduced visibility to near zero, and the gusting crosswinds created severe turbulence that tested the limits of both aircraft. Sarah could feel Luna responding to each wind shift, her controls providing constant feedback about the helicopter's attitude and energy state. She adjusted her approach continuously, using the mechanical feedback to maintain controlled flight even when visibility dropped to less than 50 feet. Walsh's more advanced aircraft struggled with the conditions, despite its superior technology. The automated systems were designed to maintain stable flight, but they were programmed for standard atmospheric conditions and couldn't adapt quickly enough to the chaotic wind patterns created by the desert terrain. His helicopter pitched and rolled unpredictably as the automation fought against conditions it wasn't designed to handle. "Sparrow, I'm getting severe turbulence warnings," Walsh radioed, his voice tense with concentration. "My systems are recommending we abort the approach." Sarah glanced at her own instruments, noting the violent oscillations in her engine parameters and flight controls. By any technical measure, the conditions were indeed beyond recommended operating limits. But Luna's mechanical systems were still responding predictably, and Sarah could feel that the helicopter remained controllable despite the challenging conditions. "Copy, Reaper," she responded calmly. "I can maintain approach if you want to continue." The mission was ultimately successful. Both helicopters delivered their passengers safely and provided effective support during the exercise. But the contrast in flying approaches hadn't gone unnoticed by the instructors or the other students. While Walsh had struggled with conditions that exceeded his aircraft's automated capabilities, Sarah had flown smoothly through the same turbulence using nothing more than mechanical controls and her own experience. However, instead of recognizing this demonstration of superior airmanship, many of the other pilots interpreted it differently. To them, Sarah's success wasn't evidence of skill. It was evidence that Luna's older systems were somehow better suited to the harsh conditions, which implied that their own advanced aircraft were inadequate. This interpretation allowed them to dismiss Sarah's performance without questioning their own abilities or training. Major Harrison was particularly vocal in this assessment. "Those old birds were built like tanks," he explained to anyone who would listen. "They can handle rougher conditions because they don't have sensitive electronics to worry about. It's not really flying skill. It's just different equipment." This rationalization became the prevailing wisdom among the younger pilots. Rather than acknowledging that Sarah's approach to aircraft operation might offer lessons worth learning, they convinced themselves that her success was purely a function of having older, simpler equipment that didn't require the same level of technological sophistication to operate effectively. The irony of this attitude was lost on most of them. They dismissed Luna as primitive while simultaneously crediting that same primitiveness for Sarah's superior performance in challenging conditions. They couldn't seem to grasp that the real advantage wasn't the age of the equipment, but Sarah's intimate understanding of how that equipment worked and her ability to extract maximum performance from systems that she knew better than their own designers. Sergeant First Class Lisa Park, who supervised the maintenance crew responsible for all the course aircraft, observed these dynamics with growing frustration. Park had been maintaining military helicopters for 15 years, and she'd worked on everything from Vietnam-era Hueys to the latest special operations variants. She understood that aircraft capability had as much to do with pilot skill and maintenance quality as it did with technological advancement. "These kids think newer automatically means better," Park confided to Chief Bradley during one of their regular maintenance meetings. "But I've seen that Thompson woman troubleshoot problems that would stump half our technicians. She knows her bird inside and out." Bradley nodded grimly. He'd been watching the same dynamics play out, and he was concerned about the broader implications for military aviation training. "The problem is, they're training pilots to be systems operators instead of aviators," he observed. "When everything works perfectly, they're fine. But when things go sideways and they need to actually fly the aircraft, some of them are lost." This observation would prove to be prophetic sooner than either of them imagined. The Advanced Combat Aviation Course was designed to progressively increase the difficulty and complexity of training scenarios, culminating in a final exercise that would test every skill the students had learned. But before that ultimate test, there would be smaller challenges that would begin to reveal the true differences between pilots who understood their aircraft and those who simply operated them. The culture at Fort Blackstone continued to reinforce the idea that technological superiority was the key to aviation excellence. Pilots were evaluated based on their ability to master complex systems, execute precise digital navigation, and coordinate with computer-controlled weapons platforms. These were undoubtedly important skills, but they represented only one aspect of aviation competence. Sarah continued her methodical approach to training, studying every scenario in exhaustive detail, and preparing Luna for each mission with the same obsessive attention to mechanical details that had characterized her entire career. She participated in the social dynamics of pilot culture only minimally, preferring to spend her free time in the hangar or reviewing technical manuals rather than joining the evening gatherings where Harrison and his followers shared war stories and critiqued each other's flying techniques. This social isolation reinforced her status as an outsider, but it also gave her perspective on the group dynamics that were shaping the course's culture. She could see how the emphasis on technological advancement had created a hierarchy where pilots were valued more for their familiarity with the latest systems than for their fundamental flying ability. She understood that challenging this hierarchy would require more than just competent performance. It would require a demonstration so compelling that even the most committed technology advocates couldn't dismiss it. As the weeks passed and the training scenarios became increasingly complex, Sarah began to notice subtle patterns in how the other pilots approached challenging situations. When faced with mechanical problems, they immediately consulted their diagnostic computers. When navigation became difficult, they relied on GPS systems and automated waypoint following. When weather conditions deteriorated, they trusted their instruments to guide them through conditions they couldn't see or feel directly. These weren't necessarily wrong approaches. Modern military operations often required exactly this kind of technological integration. But Sarah also noticed that when those systems failed or provided contradictory information, Many of the pilots struggled to fall back on fundamental flying skills or mechanical understanding. They'd been trained to trust their equipment so completely that they'd lost confidence in their own sensory input and experience-based decision-making. Luna's older systems forced Sarah to maintain these fundamental skills whether she wanted to or not. Every flight required her to actively monitor engine parameters, manually calculate fuel consumption, and use visual references for navigation when GPS signals were unreliable. This constant engagement with basic aircraft systems kept her skills sharp in areas where other pilots had allowed technology to take over. The stage was being set for a confrontation between these competing philosophies of aviation, though neither Sarah nor her critics fully understood what was coming. The military's emphasis on technological advancement had created an environment where older methods were automatically assumed to be inferior, regardless of their effectiveness in specific situations. This assumption would soon be tested in ways that none of them could anticipate. As Sarah completed another evening maintenance inspection of Luna, checking fluid levels and inspecting control surfaces with the thoroughness of a craftsman rather than the efficiency of a systems operator, she couldn't know that her methodical approach to aircraft operation was about to become the difference between life and death for people she'd never met. The reputation of Luna as a toy was about to be challenged by circumstances that would reveal the true meaning of aviation excellence. The hangar lights cast long shadows across Luna's weathered exterior as Sarah finished her inspection, satisfied that her helicopter was ready for whatever challenges the next day might bring. In the distance, she could hear the sound of laughter from the Pilots Club, where Harrison was undoubtedly regaling his audience with another story about the superiority of modern aviation technology. But Sarah wasn't thinking about social dynamics or professional hierarchies. She was thinking about the subtle vibration she'd felt in Luna's tail rotor during the day's training flight, and the minor adjustment to the control linkage that would eliminate it before their next mission. This attention to detail, this intimate understanding of mechanical systems, this preference for hands-on problem-solving over automated solutions, these were the qualities that everyone at Fort Blackstone had dismissed as outdated and irrelevant. They were about to discover just how wrong they'd been. The morning of the advanced flight evaluation dawned clear and cold across the Nevada desert, with winds gusting up to 25 knots across Eagle's Nest Airfield. Sarah Thompson stood beside Luna, methodically working through her pre-flight checklist, while the other pilots clustered around Major Harrison's briefing area, their voices carrying confident predictions about the day's outcomes. The evaluation was designed to test every skill the pilots had developed during their weeks at Fort Blackstone. Each aviator would fly a complex mission profile that included precision navigation through a mountain canyon, emergency auto-rotation procedures, combat maneuvering under simulated enemy fire, and a challenging approach to a confined landing zone surrounded by obstacles. The scenarios were deliberately stressful, designed to reveal how pilots performed when pushed beyond their comfort zones. Colonel Rodriguez stood at the front of the briefing room, her weathered flight suit and calm demeanor commanding immediate attention from the assembled pilots. She'd flown these same mountains for over 2 decades, and her reputation for fair but demanding evaluation standards was legendary throughout the aviation community. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rodriguez began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd survived combat operations that most of the younger pilots had only read about in training manuals. "Today's evaluation will determine your suitability for advanced special operations training. You'll be flying solo missions, with no wingman support and no second chances. The weather is marginal, the terrain is unforgiving, and the time limits are tight. This is your opportunity to demonstrate that you possess the judgment, skill, and adaptability required for the most demanding missions our military conducts." The briefing covered route specifics, emergency procedures, and scoring criteria. Each pilot would be evaluated on technical precision, decision-making under pressure, adaptability to changing conditions, and overall mission effectiveness. The scoring system was complex, weighing multiple factors including flight time, navigation accuracy, emergency response, and adherence to safety protocols. Sarah listened carefully to every detail, taking notes in the small notebook she always carried. Around her, the other pilots displayed varying levels of confidence. Harrison looked completely relaxed, occasionally whispering comments to his followers about how straightforward the mission profile appeared. Lieutenant Cole seemed nervous but excited, repeatedly checking his tablet computer and reviewing the digital flight planning software that had become standard for mission preparation. Captain Walsh, who'd flown with Sarah during the earlier training exercise, appeared thoughtful and focused. He'd been one of the few pilots to acknowledge Sarah's superior performance during the desert approach, though he'd attributed it more to luck than skill. Today would be his chance to prove that his own technological approach could handle whatever challenges the evaluation might present. The mission profile was indeed demanding. Pilots would launch from Eagle's Nest Airfield and navigate through a series of waypoints that took them deep into the mountain terrain surrounding Fort Blackstone. The route included several particularly challenging segments. A low-level passage through Devil's Canyon where pilots had to maintain precise altitude while navigating between towering rock walls, an emergency landing simulation at a remote desert site, and a final approach to Mountain View Landing Zone, a confined area surrounded by power lines and communication towers. Weather conditions added another layer of complexity. The morning's wind patterns were creating significant turbulence in the mountain areas, and weather forecasters predicted increasing cloud cover throughout the day. Pilots would need to adapt their approach based on real-time conditions rather than relying solely on pre-planned routes and predetermined procedures. Sarah spent extra time studying the topographical details of Devil's Canyon, noting the elevation changes and potential wind patterns that could affect helicopter performance. She calculated fuel consumption rates under various scenarios and identified several alternate routes in case weather conditions made the primary navigation waypoints unusable. Her preparation was characteristically thorough, reflecting years of experience in missions where careful planning meant the difference between success and catastrophic failure. Harrison's preparation was notably different. He relied heavily on his aircraft's sophisticated GPS navigation system and digital flight planning software to calculate optimal routes and fuel consumption. His UH-60M was equipped with terrain-following radar and automated collision avoidance systems that could guide him through challenging terrain with minimal pilot input. His confidence was based on the belief that superior technology would compensate for any limitations in experience or manual flying skills. The first wave of pilots launched at 0800 hours, with Harrison leading the formation in his gleaming black helicopter. Sarah was scheduled to fly in the second wave, along with Cole and two other pilots who'd struggled with some of the earlier training scenarios. The timing wasn't coincidental. Rodriguez often scheduled the weaker performers together to see how they handled pressure without the distraction of competing against the course's top performers. As Harrison's group disappeared into the morning haze, Sarah continued her methodical preparation. She double-checked Luna's fuel quantity, tested her communication systems, and verified that all her emergency equipment was properly secured. Chief Bradley stopped by her aircraft to wish her luck, noting with approval her attention to mechanical details that many pilots considered the maintenance crew's responsibility. "Remember, Thompson," Bradley said quietly, "that old bird has been through worse than anything they're going to throw at you today. Trust your training and trust your equipment." Sarah nodded, appreciating the encouragement. Bradley was one of the few people at Fort Blackstone who understood that Luna's age didn't automatically make her inferior to the newer aircraft. In some ways, the older helicopter's mechanical simplicity and proven reliability made her better suited to the demanding conditions they were likely to encounter. The radio crackled with updates from the first wave of pilots as they progressed through their mission profile. Harrison's voice came through clearly, reporting successful completion of each waypoint with the confident tone of someone who'd never doubted the outcome. His sophisticated navigation systems were performing exactly as designed, guiding him through the complex route with precision that would have been impossible using older methods. But as the morning progressed, other voices began reporting problems. One pilot experienced navigation system failures that forced him to rely on visual references and manual calculations. Another encountered severe turbulence in Devil's Canyon that overwhelmed his automated stability systems, requiring him to take manual control of his aircraft for the first time in months. A third pilot's sophisticated weather radar malfunctioned, leaving him flying blind through cloud formations that his pre-mission briefing hadn't adequately prepared him for. These weren't catastrophic failures, but they revealed the vulnerability of pilots who'd become completely dependent on technological systems. When their equipment worked perfectly, they performed admirably. When it didn't, they struggled to fall back on fundamental flying skills that their training hadn't emphasized. Sarah's turn came at 9:30, launching into conditions that had deteriorated since the morning's first flights. The wind had increased to nearly 30 knots, with gusts that created severe turbulence in the mountain valleys. Cloud cover was building rapidly, reducing visibility and making visual navigation increasingly challenging. Luna lifted off with the familiar vibration that Sarah had come to associate with her helicopter's reliable performance. The older aircraft didn't have the smooth, computer-controlled ascent of the newer models, but every control input provided immediate feedback about the helicopter's response to changing conditions. Sarah could feel the wind's effect on Luna's flight characteristics and adjust her technique accordingly. The first waypoint required navigation through a series of desert valleys where GPS signals were often unreliable due to interference from nearby military installations. Sarah's approach was to use Luna's compass and manual navigation techniques to maintain her planned route, cross-checking her position using visual landmarks and dead reckoning calculations. It was slower than relying on automated navigation, but it was also more reliable when electronic systems failed or provided contradictory information. As she approached Devil's Canyon, Sarah could see why earlier pilots had struggled with the conditions. The narrow passage between towering rock walls created a Venturi effect that accelerated wind speeds and created unpredictable turbulence. Helicopters entering the canyon were subjected to sudden downdrafts, crosswinds, and vertical air movements that could overwhelm even experienced pilots. Luna's mechanical flight controls provided immediate feedback about these changing conditions. Sarah could feel each wind shift through the collective and cyclic, allowing her to anticipate and counter the turbulence before it could destabilize her flight path. Her constant attention to engine parameters and rotor performance gave her early warning of conditions that might affect her helicopter's capabilities. The passage through Devil's Canyon took 12 minutes of intense concentration, with Sarah making hundreds of small control adjustments to maintain stable flight through the chaotic air movements. Her technique was purely manual, relying on sensory input and experience rather than automated systems or computer assistance. By the time she emerged from the canyon's eastern mouth, she was exhausted but confident that Luna had performed flawlessly. The radio update from the evaluation team was brief but positive. "Luna, your navigation timing through Devil's Canyon was within acceptable parameters. Proceed to Checkpoint 3 for emergency simulation." The emergency simulation required pilots to perform an auto-rotation landing, simulating what would happen if their engine failed while flying over terrain that offered no suitable landing areas. It was one of the most challenging maneuvers in helicopter aviation, requiring pilots to use the helicopter's own momentum and rotor inertia to maintain controlled flight while descending to a safe landing. Modern helicopters were equipped with sophisticated engine monitoring systems that could predict potential failures and automated emergency procedures that could assist pilots during critical situations. But auto-rotation remained a fundamentally manual skill that required precise timing, accurate judgment of airspeed and descent rate, and the ability to coordinate multiple control inputs simultaneously. Sarah had practiced auto-rotation procedures hundreds of times throughout her career, in aircraft ranging from basic training helicopters to combat-loaded special operations variants. Luna's mechanical controls made the maneuver somewhat more challenging than in newer aircraft, but they also provided more precise feedback about the helicopter's energy state and descent characteristics. The simulated emergency began with Sarah flying at 3,000 feet above ground level, traveling at cruise airspeed through a designated corridor over the desert training area. At the evaluator's command, she pulled Luna's throttle to simulate complete engine failure, immediately entering the auto-rotation procedure that would either result in a safe landing or a catastrophic crash. The technique required Sarah to lower Luna's collective pitch to reduce rotor drag and maintain rotor rotational speed, simultaneously adjusting her airspeed and descent rate to achieve the optimal glide ratio for her helicopter's configuration. She had to identify a suitable landing area, plan an approach that would bring her to that area with enough energy remaining for a controlled touchdown, and execute a complex flare maneuver that would convert her forward airspeed into lift at precisely the right moment. Luna descended rapidly through the desert air, her rotors windmilling freely without engine power to maintain their rotation. Sarah monitored her descent rate and airspeed constantly, making small adjustments to optimize her glide performance while scanning the terrain below for obstacles that could complicate her landing. The maneuver required absolute precision. Too steep a descent would result in excessive impact forces that could destroy the helicopter and kill its occupants. Too shallow a descent would cause the rotor speed to decay below the minimum required for the final flare, resulting in an uncontrolled crash. The margin for error was measured in feet and seconds, with no opportunity for second chances or do-overs. Sarah's technique was textbook perfect, demonstrating the kind of manual flying skill that separated competent pilots from exceptional aviators. She managed Luna's energy state throughout the descent, maintaining optimal rotor speed while planning an approach to a small clearing that offered the best combination of size, surface conditions, and obstacle clearance. The final phase of the auto-rotation required a complex series of control inputs executed in rapid succession. Sarah had to flare Luna's nose up to reduce forward airspeed and convert kinetic energy into rotor thrust, pull collective pitch at precisely the right moment to arrest her descent rate, and coordinate rudder inputs to maintain heading control during the critical final seconds of the approach. Luna touched down in the designated landing area with barely perceptible impact forces, her skids settling onto the desert sand with the gentle contact that indicated a perfectly executed emergency landing. The maneuver had taken less than 90 seconds from start to finish, but it demonstrated flying skills that many of the course's participants had never fully developed. "Luna, excellent auto-rotation technique," came the radio call from the evaluation team. "Your energy management and touchdown parameters were within optimal ranges. Proceed to final checkpoint for confined area approach." The final challenge was Mountain View Landing Zone, a small clearing surrounded by obstacles that tested pilots' ability to operate in the kind of restricted environments typical of special operations missions. The landing zone was barely large enough for a single helicopter, with power lines on 2 sides, communication towers on the 3rd, and a steep hillside on the 4th. Approaches required precise flight path control and the ability to manage helicopter performance in conditions where normal safety margins were compressed to minimal acceptable levels. Weather conditions had continued to deteriorate throughout the morning, with increasing winds and lowering cloud ceilings that made the approach even more challenging. Several pilots from the first wave had been forced to abort their attempts due to excessive turbulence or inadequate visibility, automatically failing the evaluation regardless of their performance on earlier segments. Sarah's approach to Mountain View Landing Zone demonstrated the accumulated wisdom of 22 years of helicopter operations in challenging environments. She didn't rely on automated systems or computer-calculated approach paths. Instead, she used visual references and manual control techniques to maintain precise positioning while descending through the obstacles surrounding the landing zone. Luna's mechanical flight controls required constant attention and adjustment, but they also provided immediate feedback about wind conditions and helicopter performance that helped Sarah maintain controlled flight through the confined approach. She could feel each gust of wind through the aircraft's control systems and adjust her technique accordingly, maintaining stable flight even when visibility dropped to less than a quarter mile. The touchdown in Mountain View Landing Zone was gentle and precise, with Luna settling onto the designated spot within the narrow confines of the obstacle-surrounded clearing. Sarah's flight technique had been flawless throughout the evaluation, demonstrating exactly the kind of adaptability and manual flying skill that special operations missions required. But when the evaluation scores were posted that afternoon, Sarah's performance was recorded as barely acceptable rather than exceptional. The scoring system heavily weighted factors like navigation speed, communication efficiency, and adherence to digital flight planning protocols, areas where Luna's older systems put Sarah at a disadvantage compared to pilots flying more modern aircraft. Harrison's score was the highest in the class, reflecting his efficient use of automated navigation systems and his ability to complete the mission profile in minimal time. His sophisticated equipment had allowed him to fly optimal routes, calculated by computer algorithms, and maintain constant communication with ground controllers through advanced radio systems. Colonel Rodriguez announced the results during the afternoon briefing, her tone professionally neutral but her expression suggesting some dissatisfaction with how the scoring had turned out. Major Harrison demonstrated excellent integration with modern aviation systems and efficient mission completion, she announced. Captain Thompson showed superior manual flying skills but exceeded time parameters on several segments. The implication was clear. Sarah's methodical approach and reliance on manual techniques were being penalized in favor of pilots who could efficiently operate automated systems. Her superior performance during the actual flying portions of the evaluation was overshadowed by her inability to match the speed and efficiency of more technologically advanced aircraft. Harrison's reaction was predictably smug. "Looks like the old school finally met the new school," he announced to his gathered admirers. Sometimes experience isn't enough when you're trying to keep up with modern capabilities. The comment stung not because it was particularly clever, but because it reflected the fundamental bias that had shaped Sarah's entire experience at Fort Blackstone. No matter how well she flew, no matter how precisely she handled challenging conditions, her performance would always be measured against standards that favored technological efficiency over manual flying skill. Lieutenant Cole was even more direct in his assessment. Maybe it's time to retire that museum piece and get yourself a real helicopter, Sparrow. The military's moving forward, and you're getting left behind. The social dynamics that had been building throughout the course now crystallized into open dismissal. Sarah's competent performance was reframed as evidence of her inability to adapt to modern aviation requirements. Her methodical preparation was characterized as inefficiency. Her superior manual flying skills were dismissed as outdated techniques that had no place in contemporary military operations. Chief Bradley found Sarah in the hangar that evening, methodically performing routine maintenance on Luna, despite having no mechanical problems that required attention. It was her way of processing frustration and disappointment, focusing on the mechanical details that she could control when the social and professional dynamics around her seemed beyond influence. "Hell of a flying performance today," Bradley said, settling onto a work stool beside Luna's engine compartment where Sarah was checking fluid levels that she'd already verified twice. "Apparently not good enough," Sarah replied without looking up from her inspection. Bradley was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Rodriguez isn't happy with how the scoring played out. She knows what she saw up there, and it wasn't efficiently programmed navigation that impressed her." Sarah continued her inspection, but Bradley could see that his words had registered. "The problem is, the system's designed to reward the wrong things. Speed over safety, automation over airmanship, efficiency over effectiveness. So what am I supposed to do?" Sarah asked, finally looking up from Luna's engine. "Abandon everything I've learned about flying and become a systems operator instead of a pilot? Maybe," Bradley said quietly. "Or maybe you wait for a situation where systems operation isn't enough, and real flying skills are the only thing that matters." His words proved more prophetic than either of them realized. Less than 48 hours later, a crisis would develop that would test every assumption about aviation capability that had shaped the culture at Fort Blackstone. The pilots who'd dismissed Sarah's manual flying techniques as outdated would discover that some situations couldn't be solved with better computers or more sophisticated automation. But for now, Sarah faced the immediate reality of having failed to meet the course's evaluation standards. Her superior flying performance had been overshadowed by her inability to match the efficiency metrics that modern military aviation prioritized. She was facing the possibility of being eliminated from the course not because she couldn't fly, but because she flew differently than the evaluation system was designed to recognize. The evening briefing the next day brought news that would change everything. Colonel Rodriguez entered the room with an urgency that immediately commanded attention from every pilot present. Her expression was grim, and she was accompanied by officers from base operations and intelligence units who normally had no involvement with the training course. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rodriguez announced, "we have a developing situation that requires immediate response. A diplomatic convoy has gone missing in Krasnovia, and initial intelligence suggests they may be trapped in hostile territory with limited communication capability." The room fell silent as the implications became clear. This wasn't another training exercise or simulated emergency. Somewhere in enemy territory, real people were in immediate danger, and the Advanced Combat Aviation Course was about to transition from theoretical preparation to actual combat operations. Harrison leaned forward in his seat, his earlier confidence replaced by focused attention. Cole looked nervous but excited, recognizing that this could be his opportunity to prove himself in real-world conditions. Walsh appeared thoughtful and concerned, understanding that actual combat operations carried risks that no training exercise could fully simulate. Sarah listened quietly, but her mind was already shifting into the analytical mode that had characterized her approach to every challenging situation throughout her career. Whatever was happening in Krasnovia, it would require exactly the kind of adaptability and manual flying skills that the evaluation system had just determined were no longer relevant to modern military aviation. The irony wasn't lost on her. Less than 24 hours after being told that her methods were outdated and inefficient, she was about to discover whether those same methods might be exactly what was needed when lives hung in the balance, and technology alone wasn't sufficient to guarantee success. The stage was set for a confrontation between competing philosophies of aviation that would determine not just the fate of the missing convoy, but the future direction of military helicopter training. Sarah's dismissal from the advanced course was about to become the least important thing anyone at Fort Blackstone was thinking about. The quiet observation. The crisis briefing room at Fort Blackstone had been transformed overnight into a nerve center that buzzed with activity typically reserved for actual combat operations. Intelligence officers hunched over computer terminals displaying satellite imagery of the Krasnovia border region, while communications specialists worked frantically to establish contact with the missing diplomatic convoy. Sarah found herself relegated to a corner of the room, officially present only because Colonel Rodriguez had insisted that all course participants needed to understand the gravity of the situation developing beyond their training environment. The missing convoy consisted of 3 vehicles carrying diplomatic personnel, security contractors, and humanitarian aid coordinators who had been traveling through a supposedly secure corridor in eastern Krasnovia. Their last communication had come 18 hours earlier, a brief radio transmission indicating mechanical problems and requesting assistance before all contact was lost. Satellite imagery showed their vehicles stationary in a mountainous region known for hostile activity, but weather conditions and terrain features made detailed assessment impossible. Major Harrison stood near the front of the briefing room, his attention focused intently on the tactical displays showing potential rescue scenarios. His confidence remained unshaken despite the transition from training exercises to real-world crisis response. The sophisticated equipment and advanced training that had made him the course's top performer seemed perfectly suited to the kind of precision mission that a diplomatic rescue would require. Current intelligence suggests the convoy is located approximately 40 miles inside hostile territory, announced Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, the base intelligence officer, who had been summoned from regional headquarters to coordinate the response. Weather conditions in the target area are deteriorating rapidly, with high winds and limited visibility expected to persist for at least the next 12 hours. Sarah absorbed every detail of the briefing while maintaining her position in the background. Her unofficial status meant she had no voice in the planning process, but her experience in similar operations gave her insights that the younger pilots lacked. She could see potential complications in the mission profile that weren't being adequately addressed by planners who relied heavily on technological solutions to overcome tactical challenges. The terrain surrounding the convoy's last known position was particularly problematic for helicopter operations. The mountainous region featured narrow valleys, unpredictable wind patterns, and limited landing zones suitable for multi-aircraft operations. More concerning was the intelligence assessment suggesting that hostile forces in the area possessed shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles capable of engaging helicopters at significant ranges. Captain Walsh raised his hand during the tactical portion of the briefing. "Sir, what's our threat assessment for surface-to-air missiles in the target area?" Morrison's response was sobering. "Intelligence indicates a high probability of manpads presence throughout the region. Any rescue operation will need to assume that hostile forces have the capability to engage aircraft operating below 5,000 feet altitude. The missile threat fundamentally changed the tactical equation for any rescue mission. Helicopters flying at higher altitudes to avoid ground-based threats would struggle with the precision navigation and landing requirements necessary to extract personnel from confined areas. Those operating at lower altitudes would be vulnerable to defensive fires that could turn a rescue mission into a catastrophic loss of additional personnel." Harrison's initial confidence began to show cracks as the tactical realities became apparent. His automated navigation systems and sophisticated threat detection equipment were designed for conventional combat operations, where enemy capabilities were well-defined and countermeasures could be programmed in advance. The fluid situation in Krasnovia presented variables that couldn't be easily quantified or programmed into computer systems. "What's our timeline for mission execution?" asked Captain Reynolds, another course participant who specialized in night vision operations. Colonel Rodriguez answered this question herself, her tone conveying the urgency that was driving all planning decisions. "Diplomatic channels indicate we have less than 24 hours before the situation becomes politically unacceptable. Weather windows suggest we'll have approximately 6 hours of marginal flying conditions before conditions deteriorate beyond acceptable operational parameters." The time constraints added another layer of complexity to an already challenging mission. Rescue operations typically required extensive planning, rehearsal, and preparation to minimize risks and maximize chances of success. The diplomatic crisis in Krasnovia would allow for none of these luxuries, forcing planners to develop and execute a complex operation under conditions that violated most standard planning assumptions. Sarah found herself thinking about similar situations she'd encountered during her deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. Emergency evacuations and rescue operations rarely unfolded according to plan, regardless of how sophisticated the equipment or thorough the preparation. Success often depended on pilots' ability to adapt to changing conditions, make quick decisions based on incomplete information, and extract maximum performance from their aircraft under circumstances that exceeded normal operational parameters. The briefing continued with detailed intelligence updates and preliminary mission planning, but Sarah noticed that much of the discussion focused on technological solutions to tactical problems. Planners were developing courses of action that relied heavily on GPS navigation, automated threat detection, and computer-calculated flight paths that would minimize exposure to ground-based defenses. These approaches weren't necessarily wrong, but they assumed that electronic systems would function reliably in an environment where hostile forces might employ jamming equipment, or where terrain features could interfere with satellite communications. Sarah's experience had taught her that backup plans and manual techniques often became primary methods when operations moved beyond controlled training environments. Lieutenant Cole seemed particularly excited about the prospect of participating in an actual combat mission. His enthusiasm was evident as he questioned intelligence officers about enemy capabilities and studied tactical displays showing potential approach routes. But Sarah could see that his excitement was based more on confidence in his equipment than understanding of the operational challenges they would face. "The threat environment actually favors our technological advantages," Cole observed during a break in the formal briefing. "Our advanced navigation systems and threat detection capabilities should give us significant advantages over any defensive systems the hostiles might have." Harrison nodded agreement with this assessment. "Exactly. This is precisely the kind of mission that modern aviation systems are designed to handle. Complex navigation, threat avoidance, precision timing, all areas where our equipment gives us decisive advantages over older methods." Sarah remained silent during these discussions, but she was troubled by the assumption that technological superiority automatically translated to operational success. Her experience had taught her that complex missions often failed not because of inadequate equipment, but because of inadequate adaptation when equipment didn't perform as expected, or when conditions exceeded the parameters that systems were designed to handle. The planning session that followed the intelligence briefing revealed the extent to which modern military aviation had become dependent on technological systems. Mission planners used computer software to calculate optimal flight paths, fuel consumption rates, and timing sequences for the rescue operation. GPS coordinates were programmed into navigation systems, and automated threat detection equipment was configured to identify and classify potential ground-based defenses. Sarah watched these preparations with growing concern. The planners were developing a mission that would work perfectly if all systems functioned as designed, and if conditions matched the parameters programmed into their computers. But there were no adequate backup plans for scenarios where technology failed or where real-world conditions differed from digital models. Chief Bradley appeared beside Sarah during a break in the planning activities, his expression reflecting similar concerns about the technology-dependent approach being developed. "They're planning this mission like it's going to unfold in a computer simulation," he observed quietly. "What happens when the computers stop working?" Sarah replied, voicing the concern that had been building throughout the briefing process. Bradley's answer was grim. "That's when people die." The conversation was interrupted by Colonel Rodriguez, who approached Sarah with an unusual request. "Thompson, I need you to review the mission planning materials and provide any insights based on your operational experience. Unofficial capacity, but I want your assessment of potential complications." This was the first time since her evaluation failure that anyone had asked for Sarah's professional opinion about anything more complex than routine maintenance procedures. She accepted the assignment gratefully, recognizing that it might be her only opportunity to contribute meaningfully to an operation where her experience could make a difference. Sarah spent the next several hours studying intelligence reports, terrain analysis, and weather forecasts related to the rescue mission. Her approach was characteristically methodical, focusing on details that the computer-generated planning might overlook. She calculated fuel consumption under various scenarios, identified potential landing zones that automated systems might reject, but which could be suitable under emergency conditions, and developed alternative navigation routes that relied on visual landmarks rather than electronic systems. Her analysis revealed several potential problems with the planned mission profile. The computer-calculated flight paths assumed optimal aircraft performance and ideal navigation accuracy, leaving minimal margins for error or adaptation. The timing sequences were based on GPS navigation and automated systems functioning perfectly throughout the mission. Most concerning, the backup plans relied on the same technological systems as the primary plans, meaning that any systematic failures could leave the entire operation without viable alternatives. Sarah documented her concerns in a detailed assessment that she submitted to Colonel Rodriguez late that evening. Her report identified specific scenarios where technological failures could compromise mission success and proposed alternative approaches that relied more heavily on manual navigation and fundamental flying skills. She knew that her recommendations would likely be dismissed as outdated thinking, but she felt obligated to voice her concerns regardless of how they might be received. The response to her assessment came the following morning, but not in the form she had expected. Instead of a formal reply from Colonel Rodriguez, Sarah received an informal visit from Chief Bradley, who brought news that would fundamentally alter her status within the rescue operation planning. "Rodriguez read your report," Bradley informed her as they stood beside Luna in the early morning light. "She's concerned about some of the same issues you identified, but she can't officially change the mission planning without undermining the confidence of the pilots who'll be executing it." Sarah understood the political dynamics at work. Colonel Rodriguez was caught between her professional judgment about mission requirements and her need to maintain the confidence of pilots who had been trained to rely on technological systems. Questioning the technology-dependent approach would implicitly criticize the training methods that had produced the course's top performers. "So what does that mean for the mission?" Sarah asked. Bradley's answer surprised her. "It means you're going to be flying backup support. Officially, you'll be positioned at a forward staging area to provide search and rescue capability if any of the primary aircraft encounter problems. Unofficially, Rodriguez wants someone with your experience available in case the mission doesn't unfold according to the computer projections." The assignment was both encouraging and frustrating. Sarah would finally have an opportunity to contribute to a real operation, but only as a backup to pilots whose methods she fundamentally disagreed with. She would be positioned to observe the mission's execution but would be unable to intervene unless catastrophic problems developed with the primary rescue teams. The forward staging area was located at a small airstrip approximately 50 miles from the Krasnovia border, close enough to provide rapid response if needed, but far enough from the operational area to avoid complicating the primary mission. Sarah would fly Luna to this position and maintain readiness to launch immediately if emergency support became necessary. Preparation for the staging deployment gave Sarah her first opportunity to interact professionally with the other pilots since her evaluation failure. Harrison approached her aircraft during the pre-flight preparation phase, his demeanor suggesting a mixture of condescension and curiosity about her unexpected inclusion in the operation. "So they're sending the museum piece along for backup duty," Harrison observed, walking slowly around Luna's weathered exterior. "I guess every mission needs someone to handle the simple tasks." Sarah continued her methodical pre-flight inspection without responding to the provocation. She'd learned that engaging with Harrison's comments only encouraged more of the same behavior, and she had more important concerns than managing interpersonal dynamics. Lieutenant Cole was more direct in his assessment. "Hope you can keep up, Sparrow. This isn't going to be a leisurely sightseeing flight through the mountains." The comment revealed Cole's fundamental misunderstanding of what the mission would actually require. Success wouldn't depend on maintaining high speeds or executing complex automated maneuvers. It would depend on adaptability, precision under pressure, and the ability to extract maximum performance from aircraft operating under challenging conditions. Captain Walsh showed more professional courtesy, stopping by Sarah's aircraft to review coordination procedures and communication protocols. His approach was businesslike rather than social, reflecting his understanding that backup support could become critically important if the primary mission encountered unexpected complications. "What's your fuel capacity for extended loitering?" Walsh asked, reviewing the technical specifications that would determine Sarah's ability to provide sustained support if needed. 4 hours at normal consumption rates," Sarah replied. Longer if I reduce power settings and optimize for endurance rather than speed. Walsh nodded approvingly. Good. We might need extended on-station time if the extraction becomes complicated. The exchange was brief but significant. Walsh was one of the few pilots who understood that backup support wasn't a secondary responsibility, but a critical component of mission success. His professional attitude towards Sarah's role suggested that at least some of the course participants recognized the value of having experienced pilots available regardless of their equipment or methodological preferences. The flight to the forward staging area provided Sarah with her first opportunity to observe the primary rescue formation in action. Harrison led a group of 4 helicopters, each equipped with the most advanced navigation and communication systems available. Their formation flying was precise and professional, demonstrating the kind of technological integration that modern military aviation emphasized. But Sarah also noticed subtle indicators that concerned her. The formation relied heavily on GPS navigation and automated coordination systems to maintain precise spacing and timing. When minor communication disruptions occurred, the pilots seemed uncertain about how to maintain formation discipline using manual techniques. Their flying was competent when systems worked as designed, but potentially fragile when technology failed to provide expected support. Luna's flight to the staging area was uneventful but informative. Sarah used the opportunity to test her aircraft's performance under the atmospheric conditions they were likely to encounter in the operational area. The older helicopter's mechanical systems provided constant feedback about engine performance, rotor efficiency, and fuel consumption that helped Sarah optimize her flying technique for the expected mission profile. The forward staging area was an austere facility with minimal infrastructure beyond a landing strip and basic refueling capabilities. Sarah positioned Luna at the designated coordinates and began the waiting process that would characterize her role in the operation. She monitored radio communications from the primary rescue formation and maintained constant readiness to launch if emergency support became necessary. The radio traffic from the primary formation initially reflected confidence and professional competence. Harrison's voice came through clearly as his group approached the border region, reporting successful navigation and normal aircraft performance. The technological systems were functioning exactly as planned, guiding the formation through complex terrain with precision that manual navigation couldn't match. But as the formation penetrated deeper into Krasnovia and approached the area where the diplomatic convoy was believed to be located, subtle changes in radio communication suggested that conditions were becoming more challenging than anticipated. Weather reports indicated increasing wind speeds and deteriorating visibility. More concerning, intelligence updates suggested heightened hostile activity in the target area. Sarah listened to these developments with growing unease. Her experience in similar operations had taught her that missions rarely unfolded according to plan, regardless of how sophisticated the preparation or advanced the equipment. The primary rescue formation was about to encounter the kind of unpredictable variables that separated theoretical planning from operational reality. The first indication of serious problems came when Harrison's formation reported GPS navigation anomalies as they approached the target area. Hostile forces were apparently employing electronic jamming systems that interfered with satellite communications and automated navigation equipment. The technological advantages that had been central to mission planning were being systematically degraded by countermeasures that planners hadn't adequately anticipated. Overlord, this is Rescue 1. Harrison's voice crackled through static-filled radio transmissions. We're experiencing significant navigation system degradation. GPS accuracy is unreliable, and automated systems are providing inconsistent readings. The response from Mission Control reflected the limitations of technology-dependent planning. Rescue 1. Switch to backup navigation systems and maintain course to target area. Intelligence assessment indicates jamming should be localized and temporary. But Sarah could hear the tension in Harrison's voice as he acknowledged the instructions. His confidence had been based on the reliability of systems that were now proving vulnerable to countermeasures that enemy forces could employ with relatively simple equipment. The formation that had looked so capable during their approach flight was now struggling with basic navigation in an environment where their technological advantages had been neutralized. The situation deteriorated rapidly as weather conditions exceeded forecast parameters and hostile activity increased beyond intelligence estimates. Radio communications became increasingly fragmented as electronic jamming intensified and atmospheric conditions interfered with voice transmissions. Sarah found herself listening to fragments of conversations that painted a picture of a mission spinning beyond the control of pilots who had never been trained to operate without technological support. The crisis that would transform Sarah from backup observer to primary asset was developing with the inexorable momentum of a natural disaster. Everything that could go wrong with a technology-dependent mission was going wrong simultaneously, creating conditions that would test every assumption about modern aviation capability and reveal the true value of experience, adaptability, and manual flying skills. From her position at the forward staging area, Sarah could only listen and prepare, as the rescue mission encountered the kind of challenges that computers couldn't solve and automation couldn't overcome. The pilots who had dismissed her methods as outdated were about to discover that some situations required exactly the kind of fundamental flying skills that modern training had de-emphasized in favor of technological solutions. Luna sat quietly on the desert airstrip, her aged systems ready to respond to conditions that were overwhelming more sophisticated aircraft. Sarah's hands rested calmly on the controls as she monitored the deteriorating situation, knowing that her opportunity to prove the value of her approach was rapidly approaching. The question was whether that opportunity would come before the primary mission failed completely, leaving the diplomatic convoy beyond any hope of rescue. The moment of truth, the radio transmission that changed everything, came at 14:27 hours, crackling through the static-filled airways with the unmistakable sound of desperation masked as professional composure. Harrison's voice, previously confident and controlled, now carried an edge that Sarah recognized from her own combat experiences, the tone of a pilot confronting circumstances beyond his training and equipment capabilities. Overlord, Rescue 1 declaring emergency. We have multiple aircraft experiencing critical systems failures. GPS navigation is completely unreliable. Automated flight controls are malfunctioning, and we're taking small arms fire from multiple positions. Weather conditions have deteriorated beyond forecast parameters, with zero visibility and ground fog and crosswinds exceeding 40 knots. Sarah's grip tightened on Luna's collective as she processed the implications of Harrison's transmission. The sophisticated rescue formation that had launched with such confidence was disintegrating under the combined pressure of hostile action, equipment failures, and weather conditions that exceeded the parameters their systems were designed to handle. Everything that could go wrong with a technology-dependent mission was happening simultaneously. The response from Mission Control reflected the limitations of remote command when field conditions exceeded planning assumptions. Rescue 1, maintain formation integrity and proceed to alternate extraction point. Weather assessment indicates conditions should improve within 30 minutes. But Harrison's reply revealed that theoretical solutions weren't addressing operational realities. Negative, Overlord. Formation integrity is compromised. Rescue 3 has lost all navigation systems and is flying manual. Rescue 4 took ground fire and reports hydraulic system damage. We need immediate assistance or we're going to lose aircraft and crews. Sarah had been monitoring these transmissions while maintaining her position at the forward staging area, officially present only to provide backup support if the primary mission encountered minor complications. But the developing crisis was far beyond minor complications. It was rapidly becoming a catastrophic failure that threatened not only the diplomatic convoy, but the rescue crews themselves. Colonel Rodriguez's voice cut through the radio chatter with the authority of someone who had made similar life-and-death decisions throughout her career. All stations, this is Overlord Actual. Rescue 1, can you maintain position and complete extraction with current resources? The pause before Harrison's response told Sarah everything she needed to know about the situation. When he finally answered, his voice carried the reluctant honesty of a professional acknowledging the limits of his capabilities. Overlord. Actual. Negative. We cannot guarantee successful extraction with current aircraft status and environmental conditions. Recommend immediate deployment of backup assets. This was the moment Sarah had been unconsciously preparing for since her arrival at Fort Blackstone. All the dismissive comments about her outdated methods, all the emphasis on technological superiority over manual flying skills, all the assumptions about modern aviation capability, were about to be tested against the kind of operational reality that couldn't be programmed into computers or solved through automated systems. Rodriguez's next transmission was directed specifically at Sarah's position. Backup 1. This is Overlord Actual. Are you prepared for immediate deployment to support extraction operations? Sarah keyed her radio with the calm confidence of someone who had faced similar challenges throughout her career. Overlord actual. Backup 1 ready for immediate departure. Luna is fully fueled and all systems operational. Backup 1, you are cleared for immediate launch. Proceed to target area and assess situation for potential extraction support. Be advised, conditions are extremely hazardous with active hostile fire and severe weather limitations. Sarah acknowledged the transmission while beginning Luna's startup sequence, her hands moving through the familiar checklist with the automatic precision of thousands of repetitions. The older helicopter's mechanical systems responded immediately, without the warm-up delays and system checks required by more sophisticated aircraft. Within minutes, Luna was ready for flight, while Harrison's formation was still struggling with equipment problems that prevented immediate response to changing conditions. The flight from the staging area to the target region took Sarah through terrain that showcased both the challenges and advantages of her approach to aviation. Luna's manual flight controls required constant attention and adjustment, but they also provided immediate feedback about atmospheric conditions and aircraft performance that helped Sarah adapt her flying technique to the deteriorating weather. As she approached the area where Harrison's formation was struggling, Sarah could see the tactical situation that had overwhelmed their technological capabilities. Ground fog filled the valleys where the diplomatic convoy was trapped, creating visibility conditions that made GPS navigation useless and automated systems ineffective. Crosswinds gusting above 40 knots created turbulence that exceeded the parameters automated stability systems were designed to handle. More critically, hostile forces had positioned themselves throughout the area with shoulder-fired missiles and automatic weapons, creating a threat environment that required constant maneuvering and split-second decision-making rather than pre-programmed flight paths and computer-calculated approaches. Sarah's first direct contact with the embattled rescue formation came when she established communication with Captain Walsh, whose aircraft had become separated from the main group during the navigation system failures. His voice reflected the stress of trying to maintain controlled flight while dealing with equipment malfunctions and hostile fire. Backup 1, Rescue 2. My GPS is completely down, and automated systems are giving conflicting readings. I'm flying manual, but I'm not sure of my exact position relative to the target area. Sarah's response drew on 22 years of experience in similar situations. Rescue 2, Backup 1 has visual contact with your aircraft. You're approximately 2 miles southwest of the target area. Recommend you follow my navigation and maintain visual contact for approach guidance. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on either pilot. Walsh, flying a state-of-the-art helicopter equipped with every conceivable technological advantage, was being guided by Sarah's older aircraft using manual navigation techniques and visual references. The sophisticated systems that were supposed to provide decisive operational advantages had become liabilities when hostile countermeasures and environmental conditions exceeded their design parameters. Sarah's approach to the target area demonstrated the accumulated wisdom of 2 decades of helicopter operations in challenging environments. She didn't rely on automated systems or computer-calculated flight paths. Instead, she used terrain features and manual navigation to maintain precise positioning while approaching the area where the diplomatic convoy was trapped. Luna's mechanical flight controls required constant attention, but they also provided immediate tactile feedback about wind conditions and aircraft performance that helped Sarah maintain controlled flight through the severe turbulence. She could feel each gust through the helicopter's control systems and adjust her technique accordingly, maintaining stable flight even when visibility dropped to less than 100 feet. The first visual contact with the diplomatic convoy revealed the complexity of the extraction challenge. The 3 vehicles were positioned in a narrow valley surrounded by steep terrain that limited approach options for helicopter landing. Worse, hostile forces had established positions on the surrounding ridgelines, creating interlocking fields of fire that made any extraction attempt extremely dangerous. Harrison's formation was attempting to coordinate an extraction using pre-planned procedures that assumed normal visibility and reliable navigation systems. But the ground fog and equipment failures had made their systematic approach impossible, leaving them circling the area while burning fuel and exposing themselves to ground fire without accomplishing their mission. Sarah keyed her radio to contact the convoy directly, hoping to establish communication that might provide better tactical information than what the struggling rescue formation could offer. Diplomatic 6, this is Backup 1. Can you provide assessment of your current situation and immediate needs? The response came from someone who was clearly under extreme stress but maintaining professional composure. Backup 1, Diplomatic 6. We have 14 personnel requiring immediate extraction. 2 vehicles are disabled with mechanical problems, and the third has limited mobility. We're taking sporadic small arms fire from multiple directions and need immediate evacuation. Sarah quickly assessed the tactical situation using the kind of rapid analysis that couldn't be programmed into automated systems. The convoy's position offered limited landing options, but there was a small clearing approximately 300 meters from their location that might accommodate a single helicopter if approached from a specific angle that minimized exposure to ground fire. More importantly, Sarah recognized that the extraction would require precisely the kind of manual flying skills that modern training had de-emphasized. Success would depend on a pilot's ability to maintain controlled flight in severe turbulence, navigate using visual references when electronic systems failed, and execute precision maneuvers under hostile fire without relying on automated assistance. She radioed her assessment to Harrison's formation. Rescue 1, Backup 1. I have visual contact with the convoy and have identified a potential extraction site. Recommends single aircraft approach from the northeast, using terrain masking to minimize exposure to ground fire. Harrison's response reflected his continued reliance on technological solutions, even when those systems had proven unreliable. Backup 1. We need GPS coordinates for the extraction site and computer analysis of approach vectors before we can execute any landing attempt. Sarah understood the fundamental problem with Harrison's approach. He was trying to solve an immediate tactical challenge using planning methods that required time, data, and systems reliability that the current situation didn't provide. While he waited for computer analysis and precise coordinates, the diplomatic convoy remained exposed to increasing hostile fire, and the weather conditions continued to deteriorate. Rescue 1. Conditions are too dynamic for systematic analysis. Recommend immediate manual approach using visual navigation and terrain following techniques. The silence that followed Sarah's transmission revealed the extent to which Harrison's training had made him dependent on technological systems. When those systems failed or proved inadequate, he struggled to fall back on fundamental flying skills that manual operation required. Lieutenant Cole's voice broke the silence with a suggestion that reflected the desperation beginning to affect the rescue formation. Maybe we should let the museum piece try it first. If the old bird can handle the approach, we can follow using the same technique. The comment was intended as sarcasm, but it inadvertently identified the solution to their tactical problem. Sarah's manual flying techniques and older equipment were actually better suited to the challenging conditions than the sophisticated systems that had proven vulnerable to jamming and environmental factors. Colonel Rodriguez's voice cut through the tactical discussion with the authority of command decision. Backup 1. You are authorized to attempt extraction. All other aircraft provide overwatch and support as required. Sarah acknowledged the authorization while beginning her approach to the extraction site, using manual navigation and visual references to guide Luna through the challenging terrain. Her technique was purely intuitive, based on sensory input and experience rather than computer analysis or automated systems. The approach required Sarah to fly less than 50 feet above ground level, using ridgelines and terrain features to mask her approach from hostile observers while maintaining precise control in severe turbulence. Luna's mechanical controls demanded constant attention, but they also provided immediate feedback about wind conditions and aircraft performance that helped Sarah maintain controlled flight through conditions that would overwhelm automated systems. Hostile fire began almost immediately as Sarah's approach brought Luna within range of ground-based weapons. Tracers streaked past her aircraft as automatic weapons opened fire from concealed positions throughout the valley. But Sarah's approach technique, developed through years of combat operations, used terrain masking and unpredictable flight paths to minimize exposure while maintaining progress toward the landing zone. The landing itself required precision that no automated system could provide. Sarah had to set Luna down in a confined area surrounded by obstacles while maintaining awareness of hostile fire and keeping the helicopter ready for immediate departure. Her technique was based on tactile feedback and visual references, rather than instrument readings or computer guidance. The extraction proceeded with desperate efficiency as the diplomatic personnel ran through ground fire to reach Luna's passenger compartment. Sarah maintained the helicopter in a hover while keeping her aircraft positioned for immediate departure. using manual controls to counter wind gusts and hostile fire that would have overwhelmed automated stability systems. Within minutes, all 14 diplomatic personnel were aboard Luna and secured for immediate departure. But the extraction had only solved part of the tactical problem. Sarah now had to navigate back through hostile territory with an overloaded aircraft, while weather conditions continued to deteriorate, and enemy forces concentrated their fire on her escape route. The return flight tested every aspect of Sarah's flying ability and Luna's mechanical reliability. The older helicopter, loaded beyond normal weight limits, struggled to maintain altitude in the thin mountain air, while hostile fire continued from multiple positions. Sarah's technique relied on constant adjustment of power settings and flight controls to extract maximum performance from her aircraft under conditions that exceeded all normal operational parameters. Harrison's formation attempted to provide covering fire and support during Sarah's extraction, but their sophisticated weapons systems and targeting equipment struggled with the same environmental conditions that had made their navigation systems unreliable. Their efforts were well-intentioned but largely ineffective against dispersed hostile forces using terrain and weather conditions to their advantage. The flight back to friendly territory took 47 minutes of intense concentration, with Sarah manually flying Luna through mountain passes and valleys while monitoring engine parameters and fuel consumption without the benefit of computer analysis or automated systems. Every decision was based on immediate sensory input and accumulated experience rather than digital displays or systematic calculations. When Luna finally crossed into friendly airspace and landed at the forward staging area, Sarah had successfully completed an extraction mission that the primary rescue formation had been unable to accomplish, despite their technological advantages and superior equipment. The diplomatic personnel were safe, but the broader implications of what had happened were only beginning to register with the military leadership who had witnessed the operation. Chief Bradley was among the first to greet Sarah as she shut down Luna's systems after the successful extraction. His expression mixed relief with a satisfaction that came from seeing his assessment of aviation priorities vindicated by operational results. "Hell of a piece of flying," Bradley said as Sarah climbed down from her aircraft. "You just did something that 4 newer helicopters couldn't accomplish with all their fancy equipment." Sarah's response was characteristically modest. "Luna performed exactly as designed. Sometimes the old ways work better when the new ways don't work at all." But even as she spoke, Sarah understood that her successful extraction had challenged fundamental assumptions about military aviation that extended far beyond Fort Blackstone. The mission had demonstrated that technological superiority wasn't automatically equivalent to operational capability, and that manual flying skills remained essential when sophisticated systems failed or proved inadequate to challenging conditions. The debriefing that followed would reveal the full extent of the primary formation's failures and the factors that had made Sarah's success possible. But for now, 14 people were alive who might otherwise have died, and Luna had proven that sometimes the oldest solutions were the most reliable when modern alternatives failed to deliver on their promises. The toy helicopter that everyone had mocked had just saved lives that the most advanced aircraft in the military inventory couldn't reach. The implications of that success would reshape everything about how military aviation training was conducted and how pilot capability was evaluated. The great reversal. The Pentagon investigation team arrived at Fort Blackstone 3 days after the Krasnovia extraction, their black sedans cutting through the desert morning like harbingers of institutional change. Led by Brigadier General Patricia Hawkins, a decorated combat veteran with extensive special operations experience, the team had been dispatched to conduct a comprehensive analysis of how a backup pilot flying outdated equipment had succeeded where the military's most advanced helicopters and top-rated aviators had failed. Sarah found herself at the center of attention for the first time since arriving at Fort Blackstone, but the scrutiny felt different from the dismissive evaluation she'd endured weeks earlier. The investigators weren't questioning whether her methods worked. The successful extraction of 14 diplomatic personnel had settled that debate definitively. Instead, they wanted to understand why her approach had proven superior to techniques that represented the current state of military aviation training. The formal debriefing took place in the same conference room where Sarah had been relegated to the background during the initial crisis planning. Now she sat at the head of the table, flanked by investigators and senior officers who hung on every detail of her tactical decisions during the extraction mission. Major Harrison, Lieutenant Cole, and the other course participants occupied chairs along the walls, their earlier confidence replaced by uncomfortable awareness that their technological advantages had proven inadequate when tested by real-world conditions. General Hawkins opened the session with a directness that reflected her reputation for cutting through bureaucratic noise to identify operational truths. Captain Thompson, your successful extraction of the diplomatic convoy has raised fundamental questions about our current training methods and equipment priorities. I want you to walk us through your decision-making process during the mission, with particular emphasis on why your approach succeeded where others failed. Sarah's response drew on 2 decades of experience in similar situations, but she was careful to focus on tactical and technical factors rather than criticizing the competence of her fellow pilots. Ma'am, the primary challenge wasn't the sophistication of the equipment. It was the adaptability required when standard procedures proved inadequate to environmental conditions. She outlined the sequence of decisions that had guided her actions during the extraction, explaining how manual navigation had remained reliable when GPS systems failed, how mechanical flight controls had provided essential feedback when automated systems malfunctioned, and how her intimate knowledge of Luna's capabilities had allowed her to extract maximum performance under conditions that exceeded normal operational parameters. The key factor wasn't that older equipment was inherently superior, Sarah continued. It was that manual techniques remained effective when electronic systems were compromised by hostile jamming and environmental interference. General Hawkins nodded thoughtfully, clearly understanding the broader implications of Sarah's assessment. Are you suggesting that our emphasis on technological solutions has created vulnerabilities that adversaries can exploit? Sarah's answer was carefully measured but unambiguous. Ma'am, I'm suggesting that pilots who can only operate effectively with full technological support become vulnerable when that support is degraded or eliminated. The Krasnovia mission demonstrated that some situations require fundamental flying skills that can't be replaced by automated systems. The exchange highlighted the central tension that had driven events at Fort Blackstone since Sarah's arrival. Modern military aviation had achieved remarkable capabilities through technological advancement, but that progress had come at the cost of manual skills that remained essential when sophisticated systems failed. Major Harrison was given an opportunity to present his perspective on the mission failure, and his testimony revealed the limitations of training that prioritized technological proficiency over adaptability. Sir, our equipment performed within normal parameters until hostile jamming and weather conditions exceeded design specifications, he explained to the investigation panel. The mission failure resulted from environmental factors that our systems weren't configured to handle. Harrison's assessment was technically accurate, but missed the fundamental point that General Hawkins was pursuing. Major, did you attempt to continue the mission using manual navigation and flying techniques when your automated systems failed? The question highlighted a critical gap in Harrison's training and experience. Sir, our procedures emphasize technological solutions and systematic approaches. Manual techniques weren't adequately covered in our preparation for complex extraction operations. This admission crystallized the investigation's central finding. The military's most elite pilots had been trained to operate sophisticated equipment efficiently, but they lacked the fundamental skills necessary to maintain operational effectiveness when that equipment failed. Their education had been comprehensive in one dimension but deficient in others that proved crucial under challenging conditions. Lieutenant Cole's testimony further reinforced this assessment. When asked why he hadn't attempted manual navigation when GPS systems failed, his response revealed the extent to which technological dependence had replaced basic aviation skills. Sir, I wasn't confident in my ability to navigate accurately without GPS assistance. My training focused primarily on operating digital systems rather than manual techniques. The investigation's technical analysis provided quantitative support for what the operational results had already demonstrated. Luna's older systems had maintained functionality throughout the mission despite electronic jamming that had crippled newer aircraft. Her mechanical flight controls had provided reliable performance in turbulent conditions that had overwhelmed computer-controlled stability systems. More significantly, the analysis revealed that Sarah's fuel consumption during the extraction had been more efficient than computer projections for newer aircraft operating under similar conditions. Her manual technique had optimized Luna's performance for the specific environmental conditions, rather than relying on pre-programmed parameters that assume standard atmospheric conditions. Chief Bradley was called to testify about the maintenance and reliability factors that had contributed to the mission's success. His analysis was characteristically blunt and technically precise. General, that helicopter succeeded because Captain Thompson understands every system, every component, and every limitation of her aircraft. she can extract maximum performance because she knows exactly what the machine is capable of under any given set of conditions. Bradley's testimony highlighted another critical factor that the investigation was uncovering. Modern pilots were trained to operate equipment, but they weren't necessarily educated about how that equipment functioned at the mechanical level. This knowledge gap became critical when systems failed, or when operating conditions exceeded normal parameters. The newer aircraft are more capable in most respects, Bradley continued, but they're also more complex and more vulnerable to certain types of failures. When everything works perfectly, they're superior. When things go wrong, the older, simpler systems can be more reliable and more repairable. General Hawkins pressed this point further. Are you suggesting that technological advancement has created new vulnerabilities? Bradley's response was measured but clear. I'm suggesting that pilots who don't understand their equipment at the fundamental level can't troubleshoot problems or adapt when systems don't perform as expected. Captain Thompson could keep flying, even if half her systems failed, because she understands how the other half works. The investigation's findings began to coalesce around a fundamental reassessment of training priorities and capability requirements. Modern aviation technology provided remarkable advantages, but only when supported by pilots who possess the manual skills and mechanical understanding necessary to operate effectively when technology failed or proved inadequate. Colonel Rodriguez was questioned extensively about her decision to assign Sarah to backup support duty and her authorization for the unauthorized extraction attempt. Her responses revealed that she had recognized potential problems with the primary mission approach, but had been constrained by institutional expectations and training protocols. General, I've been concerned for some time that our training methods were creating gaps in fundamental flying skills, Rodriguez testified. Captain Thompson's performance validated those concerns in the most dramatic way possible. The colonel's admission was significant because it came from someone whose career had been built on successful implementation of modern training methods. Her acknowledgement that those methods had serious limitations carried weight that external criticism might not have possessed. The investigation also examined the diplomatic and political consequences of the mission, revealing that Sarah's successful extraction had prevented an international incident that could have had far-reaching strategic implications. The failure of the primary rescue formation would have resulted not only in the loss of the diplomatic personnel but also in the capture or destruction of multiple advanced aircraft and the compromise of sensitive technology. Captain Thompson's actions saved lives and prevented a strategic intelligence loss that could have compromised our technological advantages for years to come, testified Colonel Marcus Webb, the intelligence officer who had coordinated the mission planning. The operational success had implications far beyond the immediate rescue mission. As the investigation proceeded, a broader pattern emerged that extended beyond Fort Blackstone's training program. Similar problems were being identified at aviation training facilities throughout the military, where emphasis on technological sophistication had gradually displaced attention to fundamental flying skills and mechanical understanding. The investigation's preliminary findings prompted immediate policy changes that rippled through military aviation training programs worldwide. New curricula were developed that balanced technological training with manual skills development. Equipment procurement priorities were reassessed to ensure that advanced capabilities didn't come at the cost of operational reliability under challenging conditions. More immediately, the investigation led to fundamental changes in how pilot capability was evaluated and rewarded. The scoring systems that had penalized Sarah for her methodical approach were revised to account for factors like adaptability, mechanical understanding, and performance under degraded conditions. Major Harrison faced the investigation's findings with a mixture of professional disappointment and personal growth. His testimony revealed genuine recognition that his training had been inadequate in critical areas, and he requested additional instruction in manual flying techniques and aircraft systems understanding. General, I recognize that my confidence in technological solutions was misplaced when those solutions proved inadequate, Harrison admitted during his final testimony session. I want to learn the skills that Captain Thompson demonstrated during the extraction mission. This acknowledgement represented a significant shift in attitude for someone who had previously dismissed manual techniques as outdated and inefficient. Harrison's request for additional training became a model for other pilots who recognized that their education had been incomplete in areas that proved crucial under challenging conditions. Lieutenant Cole's response to the investigation was similarly reflective. His earlier mockery of Sarah's methods was replaced by genuine respect for capabilities he hadn't previously understood or valued. "Sir, I realize now that I confused technological familiarity with aviation competence. Captain Thompson demonstrated skills that I need to develop if I want to be an effective pilot, rather than just a systems operator." The investigation's final report included comprehensive recommendations for reforming military aviation training to address the gaps that the Krasnovia mission had revealed. The recommendations emphasized the need for balanced training that combined technological proficiency with manual skills, mechanical understanding, and adaptability under challenging conditions. Sarah found herself appointed as the lead instructor for a new training program that would implement these recommendations at Fort Blackstone and serve as a model for similar programs throughout the military. Her role transitioned from course washout to architect of fundamental reform in how military pilots were educated and evaluated. The ceremony marking the completion of the investigation took place in the same hangar where Luna had been dismissed as a museum piece months earlier. General Hawkins presented Sarah with the Distinguished Flying Cross for her actions during the extraction mission. But the more significant recognition was her appointment to redesign the training program that had initially rejected her. "Captain Thompson," General Hawkins announced to the assembled pilots and staff, "your actions in Krasnovia demonstrated that the most advanced technology is only as effective as the pilot operating it. You've reminded us that aviation excellence requires not just familiarity with sophisticated systems, but mastery of fundamental skills that remain essential when those systems fail." The general's words represented official acknowledgement of what Sarah had always believed, that true aviation competence required understanding aircraft at the most basic level, developing skills that remained effective regardless of technological sophistication, and maintaining the adaptability necessary to handle situations that exceeded the parameters of any train. Luna remained at Fort Blackstone as a training aircraft for the new program, her weathered exterior and aging systems now recognized as valuable assets, rather than embarrassing anachronisms. Student pilots learned to appreciate the immediate feedback and mechanical reliability that had made her superior to newer aircraft under challenging conditions. Chief Bradley was promoted to supervise the expanded maintenance training that became a cornerstone of the reformed curriculum. His philosophy of teaching pilots to understand their equipment at the component level became standard practice throughout the military aviation community. "The goal isn't to make pilots into mechanics," Bradley explained to each new class of students. "It's to ensure that they understand their aircraft well enough to extract maximum performance and maintain operational effectiveness when conditions exceed normal parameters." Sarah's transformation from dismissed washout to program architect was completed when she stood before her first class of student pilots, sharing the same briefing room where she had once been relegated to the background. Her students included both new aviators learning fundamental skills and experienced pilots like Harrison and Cole who were developing capabilities that their earlier training had neglected. "Aviation technology will continue to advance," Sarah told her students during their first lesson. "But technology alone doesn't make pilots. Understanding your aircraft, developing manual skills, and maintaining the ability to adapt when systems fail, these are the foundations of aviation competence that no computer can replace." The lesson plan that followed combined sophisticated simulation technology with hands-on mechanical training, digital navigation techniques with manual alternatives, and automated systems operation with fundamental flying skills. The goal was to produce pilots who could leverage technological advantages when they were available, but maintain operational effectiveness when they weren't. The success of Sarah's program was measured not just by test scores or evaluation metrics, but by the performance of graduates when they encountered real-world challenges that exceeded the parameters of their training. Reports from operational units consistently indicated that pilots trained under the reformed curriculum demonstrated superior adaptability and problem-solving capability compared to those educated under previous methods. Years later, when military aviation historians analyzed the transformation of pilot training that began with the Krasnovia extraction, they identified Sarah's success as a turning point that had prevented a broader crisis in aviation capability. Her demonstration that manual skills remained essential in an increasingly technological military had sparked reforms that strengthened rather than replaced the technological advantages that modern aviation provided. The helicopter that everyone had called a toy had proven that sometimes the oldest solutions were the most reliable when newer alternatives failed. The pilot that everyone had dismissed as outdated had demonstrated that experience and fundamental skills remained irreplaceable components of aviation excellence. Together, they had changed not just a training program, but the entire philosophy of how military pilots were educated for the challenges they would face in an uncertain world. Luna still sits in Hangar 7 at Fort Blackstone, now bearing a small brass plaque that reads, "In recognition of distinguished service during the Krasnovia extraction mission." Student pilots examine her mechanical systems and practice manual techniques on her worn controls, learning skills that may one day prove as crucial as they did on a foggy morning when sophisticated technology failed, and fundamental flying ability made the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The toy had become a teacher, and the washout had become the architect of a revolution in military aviation training. Sometimes the most important victories don't announce themselves with fanfare. They whisper their truth in the quiet confidence of those who understand that real capability comes not from having the newest equipment, but from knowing how to use whatever equipment you have to accomplish the mission when lives depend on getting it right. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.